today we're going to be talking about what's on everybody's lips at the moment is load shedding. And we've had a couple of days now of wonderful full days of power, and overnight, of course, we get the power is we let the power stations recuperate overnight. And hi, Saba, very nice to see you. And so I've got a couple of Pr.CIOs here today with me. That's a professional Chief Information Officer designation that the IITPSA provides. For those on the call, we're going to have a discussion today, and we normally have these Pr.CIOs discussions on a fairly regular basis. I think it's quarterly, and we talk about topical matters such as the load shedding today as today's topic. And what it allows us to do is really just understand what everyone else is going through. As IT leaders, sometimes it's a lonely position to be in, and it's really great to be able to talk openly, honestly, and transparently with other CIOs, professional CIOs, about the matters that we're facing. And of course, this is a really, really big matter in terms of load shedding. And so I'd like to take a lounge approach, really, a discussion approach, like we normally do, is the Pr.CIO circle. And during that, we're going to be launching some polls, which is really management information as opposed to leadership information, but it will give us a sense of what everyone is doing and talk to everyone in the audience today about what is actually happening on the ground. Let's just use a first example. If you could, Tony, if you could launch the first poll, this is the kind of questions that we're going to be answering. And just to get a little bit of information about what is happening around in load shedding today. So here's the first one. How disruptive has increased load shedding been for your operations? So if we just all give an indication of where we are today with load shedding. And how I'm going to facilitate today's conversation is we're going to start off with the problem areas. What are the problems that we're facing today? What are the risks that we're currently, that we had on our risk register that we're managing actually properly, and we've responded to effectively? And what are those things that have caught us by surprise? So Adrian, I see you on the call. Can I please ask you to join us with your camera off, if you are able to, and join the Pr.CIO circle? Thank you very much. Great, nice to see you. And so we're going to start off with what was on the risk register, what is known and that we've actually responded to and we've treated, and then what are those risks that have happened in the last wave of load shedding that we didn't anticipate, and what are we doing about those? And then I'd like to spend the second half of today's conversation really talking about, and what should we do as the leadership team? What are the innovations and opportunities we should be taking? Because that is really what the organization is looking to us to do, is to be innovative, to be opportunity risk takers and opportunity seekers. And how are we essentially motivating a demotivated workforce in today's world with all of these pressures that are facing us? So let's start with the difficult questions, and let's first of all get the answer. Tony, are you able to show us where we landed with that poll in terms of how are we doing with load shedding at the moment? Are you able to share the poll?
Sorry, yeah, I'm not very experienced with Zoom polls. So I just want to see if I end, let me just take a screenshot just in case. If I end poll, does it bring it up on screen?
Yes, you end poll and then you should be able to share results. That's it. There we go. Okay, very disruptive. So how disruptive has increased load shedding been for your operations? Very disruptive. So maybe let's talk about those negativities. So where have the disruptions landed? So let's just start with Adrian. Now, Adrian, if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself. I know that us as Pr.CIOs know who you are, but just give us a little bit of background of yourself, and then what risks with this new load shedding that's happened, what risks did you actually recognize and you were able to mitigate quite easily?
Oh. Or should I have the homework beforehand? Maybe there was. Hi, Karen.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Adrian van Eden. I'm the CIO at GIBS, Gordon Institute for Business Science. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me. So I think, I mean, there's quite a lot of unanticipated risks. I could maybe talk more to that. We had a very interesting incident in January where our mitigation strategies, which involved quite a lot of generation capacity and so forth, themselves failed. So it was more of an unanticipated risk where we've got very big generators on campus. We've got very big UPSs. It's a business school. And that themselves started to fail because of the amount of utilization. The equipment that we've got, and I think a lot of people have got, isn't designed to run like that. So, and even though we're trying to mitigate against that kind of eventuality, we've had people coming in more frequently to service our kits, replacing batteries more often and so forth. At some point, the machinery itself breaks. And there's an interesting risk there because we couldn't find spare generators. There was none in the country. So it was a big issue. We managed to get it right within a couple of days. A lot of the mitigation, I think, certainly from a campus point of view, campus power availability was relatively well addressed prior to that. With the even pre-COVID, we'd moved to cloud. We've done a lot of stuff like that. We'd mobilized our workforce. COVID, funnily enough, might have actually been the reason we handled these things better, because we've got a hybrid workforce, right? So we have our certainly from our own administration and faculty, we found they're able to work from home, but able to work everywhere. We'd also catalyzed the transition of our product to more digitized. So when we have these kind of problems, we are finding, it was very interesting, is if I think of my career at Gibbs, how early on education, not very technical, things start breaking, nobody notices, then you become very digitized and still very dependent on localized infrastructure. If the school breaks, that was pre-COVID, and now what we're finding is even more digitized because of the way things have transpired nationally or globally. It's become better. I think the big one for us, it's almost like this mush of different situations. As the pandemic with the load shedding, they fed each other, right? The risk to our staff is interesting. So yes, we let our staff work from home, and yes, we have all of these things, but they themselves no longer have connectivity, and the towers are breaking, and they don't have that. And there's we're starting to look at things like whether we can give them UPSs and inverters and stuff at our own cost, or ways of helping them get that kind of facility at home. Because you also realize that the risk of them traveling regularly with all the infrastructure down, the robots, the road rage, the mental anxiety, spending 3 hours, it's just not sustainable. So we're trying to find a model where we can balance all of that. But obviously the big risk now is, the risk coming out now is it's fine that we could handle these things, but what about our customers? So what happens when all of our customers can't participate in our product, when they can't get to the campus, and we sell our campus as a very rich experience, or even when they're online and we're offering online or hybrid education models, half of our students can't participate. So it's very challenging, right? Yeah.
Thanks, Adrian. And from your side, Louise, does that resonate with you? Maybe just to introduce yourself a little bit.
Yes, I'm Louise van der Bank, the CIO of AfriSam. Good afternoon, everybody. Glad to participate this afternoon. A lot of what Adrian said resonates with us, specifically with regards to our office environment and almost our services areas. I think for us, where the big challenge comes in is at our plants, because from an office perspective, in a lot of instances, well, we are in an office park, our head office, and some of the requirements are catered for just from where we are from an office point of view. For us, where the very complicated planning and difficulty comes in, is really in our plants, so which has got a whole range of different issues. So the one is just purely the fact that we cannot always execute what we've planned and what we've promised to customers. Often customers can't take what they've requested, which is a huge logistical issue for the plants. But then the other issue is also the impact on our staff, because now we've got people that come to work, that work in our plants, and then when they are there, often they cannot work, or so it's interrupted, or there's a planned time that we plan that we're going to go, and then the power just doesn't come on for extended periods of time. There's also the impact of other kinds of things that happen, and I think we've all seen that in terms of all the crimes from when there's load shedding in a specific area, how the crime just sort of multiplies. So for us, it's very difficult to change some of our work that we would normally do in the day just to the night, because that poses a huge risk again for employees and where they need to work. So these are the kind of things that's impacting how we plan and how we try to manage the risk, apart from the fact that we try to build in business continuity from either solar or all of those alternatives that we can use. And then we can also only use that to an extent, because the power required to run plants and factories exceeds almost what solar can provide on a day-to-day basis. I think that, and then the second thing in terms of the solar is just when you now do get to the point that you do have solar plants and you want to wheelie that back into the grid and use it at some of your other plants, from a legislation and government point of view, all of those things are also not 100% clear. So I think we make plans, we put things in place to try and mitigate risks, but there are other factors around this which makes it very complicated to then really execute on those risk mitigating factors. And I think those are things that, from a plant and factory point of view, adds to the complexities also.
Wow, thanks, Louise. Maybe Tony, if you can launch the next poll while I ask Ari. So Ari, have you found that you had to move into the alternative energy sources? We heard generators breaking down, so crisis plan for power and connectivity. Ari, maybe just an introduction on yourself, and then if you could see what is it that you're doing?
So thank you very much. Speaking as the former CIO of a listed financial services business, which is no longer listed, which is why I'm the former CIO, I've never been so glad in my life to be working as a consultant and not be responsible for the sort of operations that I was having to babysit before. But even from a consulting point of view, every single one of my clients has had a challenge to overcome, because I guess, to me, in a nutshell, what we've seen is compounding uncertainty. What Adrian was talking about with the equipment load factors and duty cycles far above what was envisaged when plants were installed. And people have done very responsible things in terms of making sure they've got adequate backups for normal circumstances, but nobody thought that they might have to work for 3 weeks without any sort of grid connectivity, for example. And all of the standby plant is not meant to run at 100% duty cycle. And that, from an engineering point of view, is you're putting in equipment that's 25% duty cycle design, and now you're running it way harder than that. Of course, it's going to give trouble. And that's where the uncertainty comes in, because you've got the uncertainty from the primary consequences of load shedding. So you don't have electricity. Well, you may not have connectivity because nobody else in the area has got electricity either. That means that your system monitoring is perhaps down. If you've got any on-prem stuff, that's down. Climate control, if you're running UPS systems in your environment, do you have sufficient reserve energy to be able to keep your UPSs cool? And most of the data center designs, unless you're very lucky and have had a very forward-thinking data center designer, most of the time it's, oh, we're just going to be without power for a few hours. There's not going to be an issue. I'm aware of a number of data centers that have had to shut down because of thermal issues, not because they ran out of power, not because anything else was amiss, but because it just wasn't designed to cope with the situation that we find ourselves in. And I think it's a testament to many organizations' business continuity planning that we actually have had as robust a response to this as we have. I just don't believe that once we reach stages beyond 6 for any length of time, that it's going to continue to have the same sort of outcome. Because it's one thing to keep a data center up, it's one thing to keep an office park up, it's one thing to keep a plant up. But when you're talking about all of the interconnectedness of a social network and the physical arrangements of a city, it doesn't respond well. And hello, IT, have you tried turning it off and on again? Is unfortunately not the right response.
Thanks, Ari. If we can get the answers to that poll, that'll be great, Tony, because it is all about crisis management. No backup plan, 21% of people, like, that would be catastrophic, a complete grid failure. Most of people said we're only equipped to function through outages of up to, I think, 6 hours was what we looked at. So I'm going to ask Andrew now to just talk to us about, we're talking about long-term design, but just talk to us, first of all, introduce yourself, but tell us about stage 8.
Great. So good afternoon, Carolyn and members. It's actually quite exciting to have these discussions in a lounge environment, I think, because it's less formal and I think we can actually level with one another. So Carolyn, we were chatting earlier in the week in terms of the challenge and the problem. And I think Ari has articulated it quite effectively for us. And the polls have clearly shown that realistically, organizations at large in South Africa are not equipped to function in the upcoming months in the stage 8 or good out scenarios. And the reality is, particularly in our industry, in the health industry, the medical industry, where you've got acute operations, specifically for us in the medical space, and you are performing critical operations, and the load shedding is really, really affecting highly sensitive equipment. We're performing robotic operations from Germany, from all over the world. And where you have the switchover and your reliance on the grid, so to speak, in terms of providing that connectivity for these services, one no longer has the benefit of saying, well, let's just throw resources at it, let's throw money, let's make the problem go away. One has to think broader. And I think this comes back to Ari's point. How do we think smarter? Louise was talking about changing the operational hours and how we function. And it is something that we've really looked into. When we perform in critical operations and we anticipate these large periods of disruption, we really try to work around that. Now, none of this should be new to any of us. I mean, during COVID, we were forced during those lockdown periods to really improvise and do things better, do it smarter, do it differently, and disrupt the traditional approaches. So while these daunting realities are facing us, I think we also need to take stock in realizing that we've actually been through the first phase of preparing for these types of challenges, and maybe think of it differently in terms of the opportunity and lessons learned that's come out of this first round, the COVID round of preparing our operations and environment. But in terms of providing the sustained operational stability during the above stage 6 consideration is really a tough one, I think, for anybody, whether you've got solar or any other means of backup. It's really challenging to run an operation effectively in this type of scenario. So Carolyn, I know we're going to get to it a bit later, but I also would like to just mention at this stage that we should all be thinking at this point in the conversation about how do we collaborate amongst us in our industry verticals to actually put our fears around competitiveness aside and start thinking about how we can work better in collaborative efforts to start to combat some of the basic challenges, because through that innovation will come a more stable operating environment for us to survive in. We need to survive as a country. We need to sustain job creation, and we need to try and get through some of the global economic challenges that face us. So it's not just about being competitive as a company or a private business. It's actually about surviving through these challenges as well.
Thanks, Andrew. Absolutely agree. Is that, I mean, the COVID vaccines were developed through collaboration, and that's why the timelines were so significantly reduced. If we can share in terms of what works for Louise, what works for Ari, what works for Adrian and Andrew, and we can actually share our lessons learned and say, well, this worked for us and this worked for us. Those kinds of opportunities would really help us through this crisis. So we're not having to think of it all on our own. We can actually take some good ideas and apply them to our context. But I know, Andrew, you articulated, oh, happy birthday to Tony. Happy birthday, Tony. You articulated to me earlier in the week what stage 8 would look like. You can, while Tony is running the next poll, just tell us, just articulate to us what stage 8 looks like.
So Carolyn, I think that poll, the previous poll, actually really did a lot to paint the picture in terms of what our operational impact would be, because I think we need to remember that grid that Ari spoke about, you know, we all know, we've all received the comms from the ICT industry saying to us that by stage 8, sustained stage 8 will mean disruption, severe disruption, not just to the LTE networks, but also to, you know, our fiber backbones and the hops that we've got, the high towers, all of the points of connectivity will start becoming challenging. Now, one needs to understand that using satellite comms as a backup is really not a viable solution for us right now. Although there are improved connectivity solutions out there with reduced latency, we need to understand that highly dependent cloud operations often are impacted the most with the alternative means of connectivity. So, for example, where you've got real-time transaction on the generating refueling stations, they are impacted. And what that means is that as a community that's reliant on that as a sole source of energy, the impact is going to be significant. We saw that in the fuel crisis shortages in Zim some 20 years ago, and we will likely see that from a stage 8 or grid out scenario, because your primary source of energy is reliant on a digital infrastructure that allows for that transaction. People are not going to dish out fuel for free in that environment. They will be very much reliant on a means of transaction that is dependent on the same connectivity that all the rest of us are then going to be using, which is in limited supply. And it's not just satellite, it's microwaves and other means that are still reliant on generators and other means of energy supply. So that operating environment will be significantly stifled. And I think we've got to understand what it means to our operating environment. So earlier on, Adrian spoke about the hybrid model and working differently and offering our customers a different service. So in the medical industry, we have started to look at how do we offer our clients and our patients remote services. So everything from radiology to pathology type devices to all kinds of remote services, post-op recoveries, even pre-op planning, etc. Because we need to think differently, and we've got to start planning for that eventuality of operating in a stage 8 or worse condition. Now, that's the medical industry. What about the banking industry? What do we do with ATMs being out? What do we do with point of sale networks being down? What do we do without cellular networks, without the WhatsApp infrastructure and primary forms of connectivity to our offices? So these are things that I think we must start considering. It is a reality. It's no point in saying, oh, it's the end of the world, we must all panic. It's quite the contrary. We just need to think smarter about how do we operate in those constrained environments. We've proven we can do it before. Level 5 lockdown, we had to work differently and we had no time to prepare. We successfully managed to navigate that. Quite frankly, we can navigate these periods of stage 8 or worse conditions. And we need to just put our minds together now as a community and decide how best to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Tony, if you could show the results of that poll. I see, Ari, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I think one thing just to add to that, I think the real concern for many organizations is not just the loss of connectivity and the loss of power, but the impact that that's going to have on staff, especially for medical organizations and the like, where there is no real option for, in many cases, for remote presence. My wife's in that industry and there's no ways that she could deliver babies remotely. It just doesn't happen that way.
I'm glad to hear it.
But I think I agree completely with that. We've got to think about the planning now, but I also think we need to take it to the next level in terms of, this is not just something which requires a technical approach. It requires a social approach as well. How can we enable our staff to weather that disruption in a way that will enable them to safely be able to render the services that we need to provide as our part of keeping things running. It's not just a, okay, well, we'll add another 30 kVA generator here and another 400 kilowatt hours of battery there. It doesn't, that's part of it. But I think many cases, what people miss is the social aspect, and none of our industries function without people.
Yeah, and Louise, you mentioned that is the social impact and staff. I mean, as professional CIOs, we are the leadership, and we've got our own problems at home, but we've got to stand up higher than that to be leaders and to lead our staff complements, and even perhaps to be a leader in our organizations beyond what the other executives are dealing with. From your perspective, how are you doing that? Because you're trying to give answers to overnight, the staff can come in, but then that becomes a security risk. How are you as a CIO leader actually leading your environment, your staff through this?
Yes, I think I want to sort of tie with what Andrew said in terms of how COVID was quite a good preparation in terms of that specific thing, because during that period of time, we had a whole program to look at our people and how can we help them, and where possible, how can we help them to work remotely. I mean, ours are the same. It's not babies that's being delivered, but it's also not something that we can do remotely. But what we do try to make sure is that at least for the people that are able to do that, make sure that that from an IT point of view, firstly, everything is sorted. So we do have guidelines in terms of our hybrid workplace policies and procedures. So people need to have power to be able to work from home and uninterrupted power, because also you said at a point that people work from home and there is no power, and actually there's power at the office. So that's the one thing. From a staff point of view, at the plants, which is the more complex one for us to look at. And from that point of view, we are trying to see what can we do from our shift pattern. So really trying to see how our shifts put together. Are there any ways that we can actually change those things instead of having the normal kind of shift things? Are there other ways that we can do something? We've also actually started collaboration forums with our customers, because at the end of the day, we've got a product to deliver to a customer. So unless we all work together, that then becomes a problem. So from an analytics point of view, we did a lot of work to try and assist the business also to say, well, let's together with our customers also look at their patterns and what is happening in their environments, so that we can then at the end of the day plan better and together work better. So I would say as a leader, firstly, the people in our environment is still one thing, but as an IT leader, there's definitely things that we can do to assist our business and the customers of our business at the end of the day to try and get a picture, because we are not affected alone. Everyone is affected. So there are areas that customers are cancelling because they are impacted, but if we work together with them, then together we can try and find ways that help us and help them. And I guess that's our approach at the moment.
Thanks, Louise. And Tony, if you can maybe launch the next poll. I think that's very, very practical, is to understand, to look at your stakeholders as well, and to do through what Andrew said on collaboration, yes, amongst the CIOs and Pr.CIOs, but also collaboration. And we saw that with COVID as well, is that we're having to collaborate far more as a leadership team with our staff, and collaborate and to find a solution through these problems, and then to collaborate with our customers to make sure that we understand the situation holistically and we help each other. And maybe this is bringing together the community that that we need to have, that maybe was taken away over the years just through successes and not having these hard times to have to work together. But maybe through this, just having a look at the poll, how has load shedding impacted your cloud strategy? And this is going to be interesting in terms of moving to the cloud, because we heard that, the connectivity to the cloud, and I saw you nodding, Louise. Can you just expand on that? Because that was something that you were nodding when Andrew was saying.
You know what? And I actually was trying to find the where do I put my hand up button. Yeah. For us, one of the questions that's missing for me on the poll is the questions on the poll is sort of going in the direction of, are we doing cloud more and more aggressively because of load shedding? But for us, it's almost the other way around. We got to areas where we decided not to immediately move to the cloud because of load shedding. Because the problem is, as long as we are on-prem and we've got everything, yeah, we can control where we are and what we have and how we support the business. But now suddenly we are dependent on multiple people in the whole cycle to eventually get a service to whoever needs the service. So we have not changed our cloud strategy, but we have considered what do we roll out, when and where, because it's a huge issue for us if somewhere down the line, suddenly a portion of either our business or our customers or whomever does not have access to the cloud because of load shedding in their area. So it's almost a little bit outside of what we can immediately control. And that was why I was nodding my head, because it takes a lot of planning. Some things are easier to plan and more easily within control. And then there's all these areas when you are dependent on the cloud to deliver whatever service it is that you deliver. There are so many role players and service providers in between, which have good plans, but they are also impacted negatively.
Maybe going back to cash and tellers and banks and actually paying cash for our diesel. And while Tony launches the next poll, Adrian, you've got now all of these diesel generators. If you're not able to buy diesel, what opportunities are there for you? How are you able to seek opportunities around that?
Yeah, that's at the moment, yeah, I think we could almost go into the diesel business. We keep so much going on, but it's not sustainable, and it's also not meeting the climate sustainability goals either. It's kind of embarrassing what we throw out into there. So we've also taken a view that we are going to be a climate responsible organization. It's going to take some time, but we have started investigating what it would take to use alternative and renewable energy sources like solar for our campus. And I think we're lucky enough. We're not a hugely energy hungry institution. The biggest sort of footprints on our campus are our HVACs, our air conditioners and stuff, and our kitchens, which you could move on to gas, or we've already started. So we do think we could get quite a significant amount of our consumption down with solar, which is nice. Probably not all of it. We also run a hotel and a variety of other services. But yeah, I think if we lost any source of power to our campus, we would probably have a problem. Not probably, definitely, because we pride ourselves in being a campus-based education institution. We did prove that we could move online, but as Andrew and Ari and Louise were saying, if everyone's down, what do you do? Can you spread your risk? So rather than centralizing for example, we've done the opposite to Louise, where we've gone all cloud in the sense that the risks kind of spread because we don't need to cover everyone at once. So could you, by spreading things out geographically, you spread your risk, but now you're actually only catering for 80% of your customers at any point in time instead of, for example, a whole class. So it's a very tricky one. I think there's a point though where you got to go, well, in a situation where you're actually in mitigate or in response plan, you got to kind of go, well, if Microsoft goes down, if Azure and Amazon start, well, it's a bigger problem than just us then. So we've taken that kind of stance. But for the most, I think we're putting a lot into what we can do with solar and services like that.
I think you're right. It's a bigger problem than just us, and that's certainly what happened with COVID. Is that there was a period of a couple of weeks when it's just a bigger problem than just us. Everything came to a stop. And that's it. And then we started rolling out, and then the juices started running. Is what can we do now? And IT went, well, we've been telling you guys for years. Look at all of the stuff we can do for you. And I do think, Tony, if you can maybe show the results of the last poll, and welcome to Admire, our board chairperson. It's really great, our president. I think the same kind of innovation can come through from IT at this point as well. I know that we're not there we go, hot desk office available with power and connectivity. I know my son is at UCT, not Gibbs, he's just an undergrad at UCT, and often he goes to study in the library on campus because at least there's power there, as opposed to trying to study with an LED kind of light that runs out after a little while at home. So I think, these kinds of hot desks is really, really interesting. But I think, and it's an indication of the innovation, I think, that we are having to move into now. And there's lots and lots of opportunities as CIOs, as the leadership team, to be able to innovate. And Ari, I'm going to call on you first, because you are engaging in the consulting space. You're obviously engaging multiple companies, as opposed to finding answers in a single company, which is also the benefit of the collaboration. because we can learn across multiple and come up with ideas across multiple organizations. But Ari, from your perspective, what kind of innovations are you seeing from the leadership teams?
What I'm seeing is that every single business is different. And I think what it does show is that the more aware leadership is looking at what makes their particular business unique, looking at what the strengths are and saying, okay, we can function up to this point, or we can function provided we've got the following. How likely is that to be affected in a stage 8+ or grid collapse sort of scenario? And I think what is happening is that people are also being forced to go back to first principles. What is it that we actually do for our clients? What is it we do for our customers? And if we're in a situation where, let's say there's a grid collapse, let's hope we never live through it, but let's say it happens. I've sat through a number of planning exercises now where people have said, in that scenario, there is unlikely to be a market for what we're selling. We're not going to operate during that time. We're not even going to try to stay open. That sort of thing is going to be, let's preserve what we have and effectively treat it as a form of stage 5 lockdown, because things will come back after a time. And there are others where people have said, actually, what we're providing is necessary for healthcare or fire and rescue or one of the socially very important services. We've got to make a plan. Let's go and talk to our customers and see what we can do with them so that we've got some sort of a plan. And that's really, I think, fundamentally a very healthy thing, is this going back to first principles. What is it that we do? What is it that we provide? And can we work with sometimes competitors, sometimes clients, sometimes both, so that we can actually look after it? And that's something that I'm sure Andrew can talk to. I know in the medical sphere, there's an awful lot of that sort of planning going on, so that in the event that there is something nasty happening, that people actually can access emergency healthcare services. And that means medical records, it means MRIs, X-rays, operating theaters, all of that sort of incredibly complex infrastructure. It's going to take a lot of us working together. And I think that's the real crux of it. The people who are willing to say that it's not business as normal, it's not business as usual, we're going to come out of this stronger because we're going to innovate. It's a healthy attitude. I do think that what's been said about COVID being the accelerator, very true. I think we've got a good shot at getting it right, but I also think the challenges shouldn't be understated. It's going to be a very, very difficult task if we have to try and bootstrap everything following a total grid collapse. Fortunately, it's not terribly likely.
Yeah, thanks, Ari. Yeah, absolutely. So Tony, if you can maybe just launch is it the second to last poll? Yeah, poll 6, we've got 7 polls. Compared to last year, how much has load shedding added to your IT costs? That's an interesting one, because what we are doing is we had a limited budget. We were constrained, and we are constrained as an IT department to a limited budget. And are those budgets being impacted? Are the IT budgets being impacted by load shedding, or is it coming off the strategic, the organization's strategic budget? So not able to do as much as the organization has planned to do. So that's an interesting one. So how much has the load shedding actually added to your IT costs? And then the other one is, have the added costs of backup alternative power impacted other strategic projects? This is interesting because this is from an IT perspective, and some organizations, maybe it's actually taken at a strategic level as opposed to just an IT perspective. But going to your point, Ari, I think, and Andrea, your name was used in vain there. But just to say to everybody, please, if you've got any questions for us, put them in the meeting chat. I will certainly invite you to ask your question, and we can get some answers. But Andrew, you were named in that conversation. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about the innovations that you're coming up with, and the need for certainty in specific areas in the medical sector. And I just want to say something. We had a huge outcry about wearing masks, right, during COVID, when we had to wear a mask, knowing that actually it didn't do anything for us, but it did something for the people around us. It protected the people around us. And here we have a similar scenario. If we want to blow our, use all of our powers on heating and, to Louise's point, on all of these other peripheral activities, and really we should be, in the interests of the all, maybe allowing the power to go to specific, key infrastructure areas. Anyway, Andrew, your response to Ari.
Great. So I think there's a few things that we just mustn't underestimate here. One of those is I think we did touch on this briefly earlier, but I just want to revisit this again. The socio-economic outlook for South Africa is not looking positive, and it's creating huge discern amongst the talent pools that have got the opportunity to be mobile, especially those that are working globally. And what that does is it builds an attrition to your succession of the highly defined talent pools in the business. And it's not just in the IT space, it's in operations, finance, etc. And those that impact is significant. Now, while automation and AI and other optimized workflows in the business has helped to mitigate some of that, the impact of something like this, and as I use this as a broad term, the social economic global impact of stagflation. Now we're seeing this massive inflationary rise, and it's creating huge social economic challenges in the workforce as well as in the general population. Now, where these key talent pools are being impacted, it is definitely impacting these strategic projects. It's not just from a load shedding perspective, but all the unintended consequences around the load shedding and the social uneasy and unrest that we're seeing that's starting to affect us. In critical services like the medical space and other critical services, one needs to understand that the business as usual really can't be disrupted. You can't afford not to do an emergency operation on somebody that's had a burst appendix. You can't afford not to have somebody available in the theaters and on standby to assist where you have complications, where you have escalations, and especially where you've got dependencies on things like pathology results, the real-time validation of our core systems for auth. So, for example, where, especially in the private healthcare, where somebody arrives, the patient is not admitted until there's actually an auth done with the funder, with an
authorization. Mm-hmm.
That's correct. Mm-hmm. So that process, it's not a nice to have. It's not something that we'll try and catch up and do later, because if there's a demise in the patient's condition while they are in your care, the consequences are dire. So one has to ensure that auth is actually validated, that the person that's admitted is identified, and that they are who they say they are, and that we do give appropriate care based on the medical conditions as well as the funding available. So these are things that depend very much on technology, and we have to work around those constraints. Now, in our case, we do have we've got 3 forms of redundancy, both on technical as well as on the IT infrastructure. And you might say, isn't that a bit overkill? But it's not really, because the reality is it's people's lives, and it's the staff, and I think Ari mentioned this earlier, it's the staff that provide those critical services that we have to provide the redundancy for as well. So just as an example, a few weeks ago, we noticed there was a lot of unrest in certain areas. As a precaution, we actually had all of the shift workers staying at the hospital in makeshift accommodation so that they'd be available during those critical periods. And that was directly as a result of the fear of not being able to get that staff to the site. And similarly, the shaping of the traffic was changed specifically for those sites to ensure that things like auths, level of care, and validation on services for the technical equipment could take priority across our limited satellite comms that we've got. Now, these are specific examples, but I think let's bring it back to something that's very important, and I know that we spoke about earlier, Carolyn, and that for me is the role of leadership here. We all go home to the same problems, we all battle in the traffic, we all feel the same challenges, but sometimes we've got to put our own issues aside and start appreciating that we're responsible for a whole team of people and a whole organization. That means we need to start looking out for them first. We need to find ways to mentor, to coach, to give them the necessary social engagements and support structures to be able to withstand some of these unintended consequences that we've spoken about today. And the wellness of staff is so critical, because without our staff at the coalface, no operation is going to survive. You know, we all went through that period during COVID where we lost colleagues, and we saw the impact it had to our business, just in terms of the day-to-day operations. But during a level 8 and potential grid out, the dire consequences it has to that social fabric is real. Now we have to start preparing and giving the right mindset through to the critical staff that can then allow them to operate and deal with those hopefully avoidable situations that we have on the horizon. But as leaders, again, it's our duty to engage people in an authentic way and offer people an incentive to try to work differently, whether that incentive is to offer them benefits such as working from home, whether it's taking additional leave for certain additional innovative ideas that brought to the table. Whatever that is, it's our role to sit around that exco table and start having those brutal discussions. And coming back to the board, when you're having those ARC discussions around the risk and the risk mitigation measures, articulating what does that mean for people? What is the real consequence of people? And how do we mitigate that impact? Not just the operational risks or the financial risks, but how do we mitigate the risk, the social challenges, and the mental challenges that it poses to our people? And then lastly, the sustainability of the key talent. How do we build in that pipeline? Because these things are not going away overnight. Load shedding is not going to disappear in the next year. As we've seen, it's been around since 2008, 2009. So we have to find ways to try and accommodate the current status quo, but also ensure sustainability of the talent pool in the business. So that, I think, addresses the point you raised.
Thank you, Andrew. I think, and there is a question here from Ricky around, has load shedding added to the IT brain drain? We've absolutely seen that. That is in the press, that people have been leaving South Africa. Maybe not the IT brain drain, but certainly there have been people who have left the country. And I think it's up to us, and please, you know, the attendees, the people that I have on the panel today, we are all professional CIOs, so designated by the IITPSA as Pr.CIOs. That doesn't, we don't represent the people on the call. So can I please just recommend to people on the call, to those who are, and you see, quite honestly, we're all white here, but please, we don't need to be all white as Pr.CIOs. We need to have a diverse representative PR-CIOs who have these discussions across the country so that we get this really important information through. And what I'm hearing here is that it's important for us to be leaders, to say we are here for the long term. We need to go back to first principles. We need to think about our staff. We need to stand up and be held accountable to lead our organizations through this crisis. We can't be the naysayers that add into this poor rhetoric in the background that, you know, oh, it's just so bad, or why do we have this? Why, you know, woe is us, you know. As the PR-CIOs, as CIOs leadership, we need to move forward and stand up not only for our own departments, but as part of the executive in our teams. We've got 2 minutes left. So I'd like to start with Adrian to please just give us your 2 cents worth in terms of, we've heard what it is that you're doing, but for all of you, if you can start by saying, what advice can you give the people on the call now today?
Thanks, Carolyn. I think I'll just need to reflect what everyone was saying. And what was interesting to me about the conversation was 2 themes. The one was about people. So you didn't have a bunch of technical people talking technical solutions here. Every single person on this panel was talking about their staff, their colleagues, their customers. And I think it's critical that we all think about that, because that's how we're going to come together. I think Andrew and then everyone else came in and spoke. There's a lot of conversation about collaboration. So from a more strategic and tactical perspective, that resonates a lot for me. I think there's huge opportunities for us to work together. It may not involve the current competitive models that we're used to. You've got businesses like Gibbs, like all the other businesses that we're talking about who have been investing in mitigation strategies. We've got campuses, we've got operations which are trying to minimize the risk. And even amongst our competitors, could we be doing something together geographically and take our businesses to our customers, to our staff, rather than expecting them to maybe come to us, except I guess in cases of...
Thanks, Adrian. Absolutely. And Louise, from your side?
I think from our side, over and above, just is that we need to look at the ecosystems in which we operate, and ecosystems within our IT environment. What are all the people responsible there, and then in our business, and what is that ecosystem? And try together with all of those people in the ecosystem solve the issue that we are facing. I think it's very difficult to try and just solve for yourself. So from a people organization, everybody identify the ecosystems and work with those people collaboratively.
Thanks, Louise. And we are talking about the Sustainable Development Goal number 17, which is partnerships for the goals. So that is exactly, it talks to the SDGs as well. Ari?
I think it comes down to fundamentals and looking after people. The technology is going to do what the technology does. And I think we are in a very unpredictable space, which basically means we've got to have breadth of plans, not necessarily depth of plans. And as happens in aviation, you've got to make sure that you've got not just a plan A and a plan B, but you best have the whole alphabet ready, because you're never quite sure how things are going to change around you. And it's not an easy or comfortable exercise, especially for those who haven't done it before, or those who haven't looked at just how brutal situations can get potentially, how raw it is. But it requires a degree of honesty. And I think collaboration and...
I like that, Ari, honesty. I think that's a being honest to ourselves and being honest we're facing a problem and let's work together. And I'm sorry, we are out of time, but Andrew, just a last word from your side. Sorry, Ari.
No, I just welcome these conversations. I think it's, again, to the previous P.CIOs, technology will work in terms of those components that we built for these scenarios, but we need to now enable our people our customers and our primary stakeholders to really collaborate effectively. So that should be our absolute number one consideration. And the rest of the operations and everything else will take care of itself.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everybody. And as I said, this will be on YouTube. So Tony will load it up probably tomorrow morning, and they will be writing an article around this. But please, let's keep these conversations going. This is all about collaboration. Clearly, the social impact is what we spoke about today, as well as the E impact, the environmental impact that people are considering and conscious of in making long-term decisions when they're making innovation decisions, and not just short-term interventions, as Adrian was saying, in terms of a long-term solution there. But thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and really thank you to the panel of PR CIOs. Thanks, everyone.